Here with us tonight, we have a representative of the Alliance of Small Island States to describe the coalition's negotiating position within the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. How did the Alliance of Small Island States come into being?
In the mid-1980s, climate change emerged as a subject of considerable international attention. Its most visible symptom, global warming, was seen as one of the most significant challenges to humankind and propelled the international community into action. Not long after, in May 1992, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, or UNFCCC, was agreed upon and adopted. That same year, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change released a report which stated that for small island and low-lying states, human and natural resources were threatened, with inundation, coastal erosion, increased flooding areas, and loss of fresh water and arable land. Recognising these vulnerabilities and common interests, some 43 small island and low-lying states came together under the UNFCCC to form an ad hoc negotiating bloc, the Alliance of Small Island States, most commonly known as AOSIS. This bloc aimed to overcome the individual powerlessness of its members and bring global attention to the plight of small island and low-lying states.
Now, could you outline for us the negotiating position of AOSIS?
The vulnerabilities of AOSIS member states to the adverse effects of climate change are clear. The scientific evidence and the on-the-ground evidence of rising sea levels, changing weather patterns, and loss of arable land are all factors that impact on the everyday actions of individuals and governments of these states. With some low-lying atoll states under threat of complete inundation, the moral stakes of failing to act on climate change are high. Led by the initial advocacy of the Maldives, the AOSIS bloc aims to overcome the setbacks of their lack of military, economic, and political influence by invoking the moral costs of climate change inaction to the international community. One interesting example of an attempt to draw international attention to the potential results of rising sea levels was when the Maldivian parliament met 6 metres below sea level in order to provoke action against global warming. The negotiating position of AOSIS in the UNFCCC is fundamentally guided by their unique geographical vulnerabilities to climate change. Moreover, the member states of AOSIS share common characteristics, including small populations, landmass, and economies. Remarkably, when combined, AOSIS member states amount to less than 1% of global percentages in all of these areas. As a result of these factors, the individual members of AOSIS hold an almost negligible amount of political clout. However, when united as a group, using the moral and ethical arguments respective to their vulnerability, they have been able to strengthen their voice and achieve impressive results within the UNFCCC. For example, during the creation of the UNFCCC and the Kyoto Protocol, AOSIS has been highly active, using soft power to achieve its goals. More recently, AOSIS continues to seek to achieve the ambitious goal of mitigating global warming at 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius. AOSIS invokes the common but differentiated responsibility principle, enshrined within the UNFCCC, and believes it is the responsibility of developed nations to take on ambitious mitigation goals. AOSIS advocates for science-based, rule-based, legally binding climate regime, involving transfer of funds and technology from developed to vulnerable developing states in order to aid with adaptation costs and the conversion of those developing nations to clean economies. AOSIS continues to maintain that this should be achieved via a second commitment period of the Kyoto Protocol, that is legally binding, raises the level of emissions reduction targets, and respects common but differentiated responsibilities.
There have been comments on the unity of AOSIS. Could you elaborate on some of the difficulties that have faced AOSIS as a negotiating bloc?
Yes. Well, having spoken about the way AOSIS has used its unified position and the moral clout of its member states, extreme vulnerabilities, to achieve success within the UNFCCC process, it is important to remember that many of the successes of AOSIS occurred during the earlier periods of the UNFCCC. Since then, the Conference of the Parties process has become much more complex and politicised. UNFCCC members have continued to fragment into various negotiating blocs, and the topics dealt with in the Conference of the Parties are expanding to include a much wider agenda. This has caused some subsequent fragmentation within AOSIS, as the individual interests of member states have diverged on several issues, including forestry and market-based mechanisms. More and more, we have seen individual members submitting papers on their own or with non-AOSIS states in order to maintain their national interest on issues where unity is not found within AOSIS. This is as a result of the dilemma of the two-level game. This means that the domestic and international politics of an issue are inextricably connected, and the credibility of a state's negotiating position on the international stage will be affected by their domestic policy. For AOSIS, the two-level game dilemma essentially means that a member state's domestic policy towards an issue of importance in the UNFCCC will in turn affect the issues that the coalition can legitimately address, thus affecting the overall cohesiveness of the alliance.
Could you please make some final remarks?
The plight of small island and low-lying states in the UNFCCC is unique and interesting, given their geographic, political and economic characteristics, and the moral high ground they are able to adopt in negotiations. As a result, they have been able to achieve a great deal of success within the UNFCCC. But, with the widening scope of the UNFCCC topics, and the complex nature of international climate policy, it has become difficult for AOSIS to overcome its economic and political disadvantages via complete unity, due to the diverging interests of individual members on some key negotiating issues.